It's so over, Wagner Bros. Just like that, the Prigozhin putsch went out not with a bang, but with a whimper. Yesterday, Yevgeny Prigozhin, I guess we can't really say he surrendered, but he negotiated. Well, I guess, no, he did. He negotiated the terms of his surrender. Those terms were accepted, and the assault on Moscow was called off. The troops were pulled out of Rostov. They're returning to their barracks. And Prigozhin himself is on a slow boat to Belarus. He achieved, as far as I can tell, none of his explicit goals. Nothing that we were being told publicly that Prigozhin wanted was given to him. But he was able to escape with his life, and it would appear his freedom. Now, what he achieved in reality, though, was nothing short of the humiliation of Vladimir Putin and the Russian state itself. The Democrats here love to talk about the January 6th insurrection, but, you know, they know that nobody believes that. Nobody takes that seriously. No one thinks that the American state was in danger of collapsing or even being challenged. It did not face any kind of a challenge. But this weekend, even though I said from the beginning I don't see how Prigozhin and Wagner wins here, it's just that the numbers aren't on their side. They were, from what we heard, 25,000 men versus the entire Russian military. Just, I didn't see that working out in their favor. Nevertheless, there was an army of 25,000 men which launched an attack on the Russian state. And so maybe they weren't successful this time, but there was a chance, it was a small chance, but there was a chance that the Russian state could have been overthrown. And that is something that you normally don't think about or have to worry about with a big country like Russia. These are, well-established places. These are considered stable. Russia does not appear, based on yesterday, appears a lot less stable than it did on Thursday. Again, that does not mean Russia is going to collapse. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the risk is higher now, and that is embarrassing. Because now, inevitably, there's no way that you just forget this. Other world leaders, when they deal with Putin and when they deal with Russia, they're going to have just a bit of a hesitation in the back of their head as to whether or not the person before them is going to be able to fulfill the commitments that they're making, because, there is a chance, even if it's a small one, that they could be challenged from within and overthrown. And that any deal they made while they were in charge might be out the window if the next wild card comes in and decides to start from scratch. He may just say, you know what, I'm not going to pay any of the debts of the old government. This is why countries that have coups, successful coups or even unsuccessful coups, and have even regimes that appear somewhat unstable or potentially unstable, they don't have as good a credit in the rest of the world, whether that be financial or political. And so there's no avoiding it. This situation has damaged Russia. And so the reason I say this is because there are some people still clinging to the idea that this was somehow a Psyop used to draw out Ukrainian troops. The costs of this, even if you want to call this Psyop, of this staged insurrection against the Russian state, they far outweigh any potential benefit that they would have on drawing out Ukrainian troops, and tricking them into thinking that Russia's collapsing, and so Ukraine, gets real aggressive and they, expose themselves, and then the Ruskies can wipe out a bunch of their troops. If that was the goal, this was not worth it. From what I saw, the last count I saw was 7 combined helicopters and planes were shot down in Russia by other Russians. Whether that was, I don't know if those were all Russian state aircraft or if it was a combination of Wagner and in the Ministry of Defense, whatever. Those were all still aircraft and pilots that were fighting on Russia's side against Ukraine, and they took them out themselves. That's not a Psyop. That's something really wrong. And so in order to reestablish his authority and the authority and the supremacy of the state, Putin's going to need to take some serious steps. Just letting the guy go and slapping everyone on the wrist and saying, hey, let's let bygones be bygones and just don't do it again. That's going to look weak to people internationally, even though I think internally that's probably the best thing to do. Because what are you going to do? Are you going to take all these 25,000 Wagnerites and execute them? I know that that's what the Democrats would do if this were the United States. It is quite funny when you look at, the January 6th insurrectionists in free America. They get 20 years in prison because they walked into the U.S. Capitol without paying the fee for a guided tour. And so those people get 20 years in prison. In Russia, you launch an armed insurrection. You lead an army to march on Moscow and overthrow the government. We'll let you go. It's not worth it. It would be too much. It would be too damaging to the country to try and put you away. Let's just call a truce. Let's go our separate ways and pretend like none of this ever happened for the better of the country. That would never happen. If this were the United States, the Democrats would order the execution of Prigozhin and all 25,000 of his men for treason. So, I don't think that this is going to have a widespread effect, but the Prigozhin putsch did have the side effect of exposing just how ridiculous this idea that, Russia's a dictatorship, but in America we're free, how ridiculous that idea is. In fact, after seeing 25,000 men engage in an insurrection, engage in treason against their government, and just go back to work the next day like nothing ever happened, that makes me think, what? If I were in Russia and I were a political dissident, I think I'd feel pretty safe. I don't feel like I'd have to keep my mouth shut if there were, issues in which I disagreed with Putin on, substantive differences or something like that. Now, maybe if I advocated openly and all the time, hey, we need a CIA coup and we need a NATO-led government in Russia. Maybe then you would run into some issues because Russia does not have free speech. So I'm not going to pretend like they have free speech. We have free speech on paper, but not entirely in practice. It depends on the court and depends on a lot of factors here in America. But in Russia, even though they don't have freedom of speech, it seems like the things that you're allowed to disagree on are pretty wide. I think it's just as long as you're not a NATO puppet, you're probably going to be okay. So not saying they're perfect, but can you really say Russia's real tough on these folks when they're letting them all go? Anyway, I'm a little disappointed it's over this quick. I'm glad it is because no one else is going to die, at least because of this. They're going to go back to dying in the war that was already going on, but there won't be some long, drawn-out Russian civil war, so I guess at least there's that. But it would have been so funny on Monday, reading the articles about how, the Wagner group, I know we said that they're bad and they're war criminals, but they're good, actually. They're quite good people, they're moderate rebels, and we need to support them. Oh, and Prigozhin, he's largely secular. Those articles would have been very funny. Would have been funny listening to CNN talk about how, they can't wait for, President Prigozhin to overthrow the illegitimate Putin. That all would have been very funny, but alas, we were not afforded that. So interestingly enough, Lukashenko turned out to be the big peacemaker. He called up Prigozhin, and he, coordinated with Putin apparently, and he said, let's patch things up between you two. And Prigozhin agreed to go to Belarus, and I guess he's in exile there. But they probably, I don't know if they're going to let him keep all his money. It sounds like they probably will. I think he's even going to still retain ownership of Wagner, but the Wagner group is going to submit and pretty much integrate with the Russian military. Prigozhin is no longer going to have battlefield command over his troops. Wagner is going to be paid as contractors to fight for Russia, but they're going to have to follow orders from the Russian chain of command, I believe, is the deal we're going to end up seeing. That's the direction things seem to be going in. Obviously, we have not gotten a contract released or anything like that, and that kind of contract would, I'm sure, never be made public. But that should be the net effect. The Wagner soldiers should become indistinguishable from regular Russian soldiers. And Prigozhin, if he's allowed to keep his wealth, is just going to collect a paycheck. I mean, I would be happy with that arrangement if I were him. But it seems like he got a big head and wanted to be, the big military commander, and he was telling the Ministry of Defense what to do, and he caused a lot of problems, obviously, because he launched an insurrection. I don't know how it got to that point. I mean, it's like, I'm surprised that if Russia was this totalitarian nightmare country, you would think that Prigozhin would have been just whacked a long time ago, because he's been saying for a while how stupid he thinks the military leadership is, and how they don't know what they're doing, and they're getting his men killed. I mean, if I were in his position, I would just sit back. I would run the company, as a company. People would sign up to be mercenaries, my employees. They would sign up, they would be contracted out to the Russian military. The Russian military would tell them what to do, and everything would be peachy keen. That would be easy. Now, you could say that Prigozhin, he has enough money, he's rich, he's been rich for a long time, he doesn't care about the money at this point, he's just personally invested in winning this war, and he's very passionate, and thinks that the Russian military is preventing an ultimate victory. And that might be true. That might be exactly what happened here. I don't know how else you could explain any of this rationally, unless you just want to say the man's gone insane, but I don't see that. If he was insane, I would think he would have snapped a long time ago. You also could say that maybe he was driven crazy by the war, by being in all these battles. People keep bringing up Colonel Kurtz. I've never actually seen the movie. I've only read the novella, in which I don't think that Kurtz is actually a colonel, necessarily. I think Colonel Kurtz is the movie character. But either way, the characters have the same arc in both the book and the movie. He spent too much time in the jungle. And, he got sucked into the heart of darkness. And when that happens to someone who has control over 25,000 troops, weird things can start to happen. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.